everyone. Next up, we have a very hot topic brewing, especially for the youths. Addressing political apathy, making our votes count. This session will be moderated by one of our best, Mr. Daniel Teo. Daniel has just recently returned from London after completing his Chevening journey. He studied at Brunel University London and has a master's in political communication. Previously, he was the secretary to the Selangor State Minister for Trade and Industry. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Malaysia. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. So I'll jump right into the session, right? We have three speakers here, and we'll start with Ms. Arina, and then followed by Professor Wong, and then Mr. Zaid. So a brief introduction about Ms. Arina. She is obviously one of our own, a Chevening scholar from 2017 to 2018, and she completed a master's degree in emerging economies and international development at King's College London, and she was once the Special Functions Officer to the Youth and Sports Minister in 2019 to 2020, and currently she's a senior analyst at the Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in Asia's Pacific. Okay, and then we're followed by Dr. Wong Chin Huat. Dr. Wong Chin Huat is Deputy Head of Strategy at the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Asia headquarters at Sunway University. He obtained his PhD from the University of Essex, where he specializes in electoral and party systems. Dr. Wong was sponsored by the Chevening Scholarship to complete his doctorate in 2002 to 2006. And then by request, Mr. Zain, who said he's the more chill speaker, wants to go last. Mr. Zain has a master's in international strategy and diplomacy from the London School of Economics and Political Science, which he completed in the years 2019 to 2020, and he is currently the regional public policy director at the Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific, an internationally ranked regional think tank based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So we'll start with Arina, and then Dr. Wong, and then Zain. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So maybe I'll just start off with a little bit background on what is political apathy and how do we understand it. So political apathy can come in the form of just disengagement or lack of interest in politics and participation in politics. Broadly, at least I would categorize it as, there's broadly two groups. So one is there's a group that really doesn't know. I think by default with any kind of education, people are just apathetic in general until you gain interest over time due to your, influences in your family or your education. So there's that group that doesn't really know, and then they don't really care to go. And then there's the other group which is a bit more complex. They know. They've made that investment in their political decisions and they understand politics, but they find that the returns of those investments don't come out. So that's one. The other part is they also know, but they feel very much jaded. I think it's also very befitting we came after Prof's presentation to show the complexity of the situation. And sometimes learning all this information can create even further apathy or even further I guess disdain or feeling hopelessness. So I think that's just the general context here that we talk about when it comes to political apathy. And I think over the past few years, it's been driven a lot by cynicism, fatigue, and also ignorance. As a person in my very, very short stint in government, I literally lost my job overnight when Dr. Mahathir resigned. So I fully understand the point of jadedness. It was also a very tumultuous time. We didn't know what was happening at that time, and I felt that also my participation in politics, I was never involved in politics, just FYI. It was more on the ministry side, but it did feel like, and I resonate a lot with what Prof talked about, because you do see it even at the level of ministries. So I think that's just kind of the context that we are now. So even during the time in the ministry where we were pushing for OT18, we were quite surprised that when we engaged some of the youth, they also already, number one, felt that they didn't understand politics and they was not interested in pushing for politics, even though we were trying to help build that political participation, because it starts there. When you build that political participation, you build that education, that's when it gets more interesting for them. Because let's be honest, even a lot of adults don't really understand politics. So it takes a lot of political education as well across different stages. So why not start them younger? So I mean, there's a lot of so it was a lot of interesting insights at that time that even within amongst the young, they felt that jadedness already and they just didn't care, even though we were there trying to fight for their rights. So I think on the point of political apathy, I just wanted to point out trends. So if we're looking at politics, right? I mean, trends in Malaysia, not just in politics, but across different sectors. If you look at politics in the next 5 years, it's probably on the next few years, there's going to be a lot more coalition building. I think Prof's super expert on that, so he can talk about that. There's no longer a dominant party, right? So if you look at the economy as well, things like cost of living, managing, inflation is also going to be on the rise. Education, what is it going to look like in the next 5 years? Even things like climate change, right? We're already in a climate crisis. How are we going to manage it in the next 5 years? So a lot of people, when they talk about politics and they say that they're disengaged and I'm apathetic, these things are going to change over time and it will affect you in the next 5 years. So your investment now is important, even though, albeit it's not the best investment that we have. A lot of people might think that, looking at the candidates that are coming up, it's a race to the bottom, right? I think interestingly, Azmin Ali's brother, Azwan Ali, Diva AA, or his famously known for, he said he's going to challenge his brother. And then this morning, he said, I'm not going to go against my brother because my mother came to me in a dream and told me not to compete. So I don't know, because 8 o'clock in the morning, he said he was going, and then 9 o'clock, he changed his mind. So I don't know what power nap he had in between that made him change his mind. So obviously, there's a lot of this that will happen in Malaysia. And it doesn't seem like our choices are great, but we have to make, at least the closest call to what we want if we look at this forecast. Right? If you look at the next 5 years, what are the things that we want in the next 5 years? What are things that edge closer towards that? Otherwise, whatever that Prof presented earlier on is going to remain because the status quo benefits the elites. So I think that's just something I wanted to pose. There was an interesting, as I was doing my research and just reading up about politics currently, I don't know if you guys know political theorist Antonio Gramsci. So there was a quote that came up that he said, basically, you should have the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will, right? So you can acknowledge the reality. It's not great. It could be much, much better. But that should not discourage you from wanting to change and have that will and that optimism to want something better. Granted, I acknowledge that a lot of people also may be speaking from a position of privilege because I understand the complexities in Malaysia. I may, as an individual, I may come from a position of privilege in terms of my wealth, my racial background, and it's not easy for everyone to want to stay and fight, within this country. Some have left for better opportunities, understandably so. But for those of you who are here, for everyone that's here, I think that's an investment that, I think it's worth taking, even though your ROI might not be in the next election, because there's also a lot of talk saying that analysts are predicting we may not even have a government on November 20th because it's so the parties are so broken up. There are a lot more coalition building, happening until after elections. We will only see the momentum. I think maybe in the last 2 weeks, the last week of elections. So I think that's the future of Malaysia. It's a lot more coalition building, a lot more negotiations, and maybe a lot more parties. I'm not so sure, but that's the kind of investment that we're willing to make. So yeah, I think that's all for me.
Thank you. Just a quick question to invite you to elaborate further. I think as a topic we're saying, making our vote count, but I think in the face of lack of good choices, like even our hero Yobi has an issue with business interests and politics and all that. Voting is only one. In fact, it's the minimum part of democracy, right? In your engagement, your experience engaging with young people in the Defence Force Ministry, pushing through the 18th Amendment. What are the other forms of political participation would you recommend to people who want to make their voices heard?
I think one is understanding how government works, because others outside of politics, I think there's a great way for you to contribute if you're a bureaucrat as well. So, and I think the bureaucrat is such an underrated or overlooked or underestimated part of the government. People like to stereotype bureaucrats on they're lazy, they're this and all that. I mean, obviously, to a certain extent, but this goes in any organization, right? Even corporates, you have people who are very lazy. But they are very, very strong and they're very knowledgeable about how governments work. So if you don't want to get into politics per se, because politics is very much complicated right now, I think it's important for you to understand how government works and be involved at least in that space, because that's how you can contribute. Because regardless of what happens, and this is where the dynamic needs to change, because in an environment where politicians or heads keep changing at the top, the bureaucrats need to be more empowered so that they can continue on doing what they're doing in the day-to-day without having that top-down mandate, right? So if you get a better group of bureaucrats contributing and contributing ideas, coming in, and I know it's tough because I know the starting salary is not great. Your career progression is also very long, but I think that's one area that you can get involved in. I think being more involved in government as a bureaucrat.
Thank you, Arena. We'll move on to Dr. Wong.
Thanks, Danny. First of all, good morning, everyone. Thanks to Nawa, Daniel, and the committee for inviting me. This is actually the first time speaking at the CAMFest platform. Now, I want to start with showing to you three numbers: 71%, 43%, and 23%. Would you consider a 71% majority big? Yeah. That's more than two-thirds, right? What about 43%? It's a plurality, not even a majority. What about 23%? What are these numbers? When people talk about BN won a landslide in Johor, the idea of the landslide comes from the 73% of the legislative majority, 40 out of 6. If you look at the numbers of votes, it's only 43%. If you look at the percentage of voters, including those who did not vote, BN got only 23%. 43% in Johor, you have 45% of the voters stay out of the election. Now, non-voting or abstention can be voluntary or involuntary. I want to start with the involuntary part first. In Johor, part of it is because of COVID and travel restriction. But there's something very general that caused vote suppressions. When you want to vote, but they make it so difficult for you to go out to vote, and if it hurts you, particularly as a member of a particular segment of society, rather than randomly across the board, that's vote suppression. The major problem with that is we do not have absentee voting facility in Malaysia. It's ridiculous that many Malaysians now, as part of the modern contemporary lifestyle, you live outside of your constituency. And it's ridiculous to say that you must vote at where you sleep at night. You may work in one place, stay at night at another place, and you have own property elsewhere. But we do not have the facility to vote where we want to. We have to fly back, and that disproportionately disenfranchise the poor. Because let's say you are from Sabah and Sarawak, you work here, you earn a minimum wage of 1,500, and now say, for the country's sake, please fly back and vote there. Would you do so? You would. Especially when if election is called very close to any festival, like that matters to you. So we always have to recognize part of that problem is vote suppression. And we need to speak up because for us, those who don't suffer from that, you would just assume it's a free choice, but it's not. The second part of that is voluntary. You choose not to go because you can't see any reason going. And the main reason, of course, is political apathy. We don't find a reason that why we need to go out to vote. And why? Let me offer you an answer. Because you are romantic, political. You assume that you have to go to vote. You go to vote when the world is ideal, when you choose between good politicians. Okay, I'm a realist. not romantic at all. I go to vote is exactly because of the opposite. The politics is so screwed up. If everything is fine, why should I be bothered to queue up and vote? Right? The outcome will be indifferent. Now, after 19th of November, these are the positions that are going to be filled up. 222 MPs, 1 Prime Minister, potentially 3 Deputy Prime Minister, possibly 60 to 70 Federal Minister and Deputy Minister, and 116 State Assembly person, 3 Chief Minister, 30 State Minister, what we call EXCO members. You calculate how many jobs have to be filled. And from what Professor Gomez has said, each of them would bring their own political appointees. Whether you go out to vote or not, on 2 Saturdays from now, all the jobs will still be filled. What's the difference? The difference is whether do you have a say. That's all. So, there is a rational case of not voting. If people tell you, they say you're being selfish, you can actually tell them outright and say, I have a very rational reason that I don't have to go out to vote. That reason is that for whatever mystical reason, that the strangers out there collectively will make the decision that best serves my interests because I'm so blessed. If you can trust strangers enough, you should really not go out and queue up under hot sun or in rain for an hour just to vote. Why bother? So it's really go back to say, do you believe that you're so blessed that you can trust strangers? To go out to vote is not that you have enough trust in politicians, but it's that you have enough trust in strangers. As a realist, I don't trust strangers out there. I don't think that I'm so blessed. Whatever decision people make would be the best for me. Therefore, I'm going to vote. Thank you.
I am a long time follower of Dr. Wong and his work. I'll ask something more relevant to your experience. What about in constituencies where it's very, like you said, landslide happen, where you know who's going to win regardless? Would you say that it is still rational to go out to vote in those areas?
Okay, examples like Seputih, my former constituency. You have Teresa got that meetings, I can't remember how many times of her opponents. So what should you do? Does it matter? In her seat alone, it probably doesn't matter because I don't think that anything will change in Seputih. But overall, it matters in 2 other ways. One, even though people just look at seats, the number of votes at the end of the day is still very important. It still gives those parties that you support or you don't support the legitimacy or the lack of legitimacy. Go back to the numbers I gave you at the start, 71%, 43%, and 23%. The difference between the 43% and the 23%, the percentage of BN support when you count only total valid votes and when you count as part of the entire electorate is the 45% who are absent. They're simply invisible. They have no say at all. They are like thin air. No one sees that. No one hears that. So if you don't go out to work, don't complain that people just walk you by, step on you, because that's your choice, right? So at that level, you yourself would not be noticed. The party you support, if you want to have any say, will make a difference. But how do we overcome the problem anyway? It's still not satisfactory. How do we overcome the problem for people who live in landslide? In strongholds, where the strongest candidate is going to win a landslide, no matter what. Well, we need to pay parties, contestants, for getting votes. This is where we need to bring in the idea of public funding for political parties. Because then, even though your votes won't change the outcome, the vote will translate into banknote for the party you support. And that's something we need to push. Thanks to the good work at by Sadiq and Arena and your colleagues, we have got only 18. More importantly, is actually the automatic voter registration. The outcome of that is the lowering of turnout. So the next thing we need to fight, one of them is absentee voting right. The other one is public funding for political parties. And for now, those of you who get a chance to have multi-corner, you should cherish your chance. Because it's only in multi-corner that you have a better say, because things are so murky. So when things are more messier, you should be happy, because as a boss of the politician, you're more powerful. And when everyone else around you do not want to go out to vote, you must go, because your vote share actually have higher value. Right? When people give up, they're basically leaving the fate of the collective future to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. It's quite empowering. Okay, we give it to Zain. Over to you.
Thank you. I endorse what everyone has said. This is the best part of the last. We don't have to speak too much. I'll start with this. Europeans like to start with a joke. Asians have to start with an apology. I will apologize if I don't make much sense. I barely slept last night, and the baby was campaigning while I was trying to sleep. So it was difficult to get some rest. But anyways, happy to be here. Happy to be back in my event. This is a very interesting topic, and I think I don't have to repeat. I think the point of this topic is something more worth repeating why you should vote. You all know why you should vote, right? I think let me give you a few perspectives. I think maybe controversial. When I was very young, I was extremely idealistic. When I remember the first time I voted. I was 23 years old. 2013. I was so optimistic. I wanted to vote for institutional reforms, governance, right? I was so optimistic. I wanted to defeat the evil BN regime. I don't know if you guys resonate with this, but I was at the era where we're going to defeat the government, because the government was very strong. The government was very strong. Remember, BN G13, they were still strong. They didn't have two-thirds majority, but they were very strong, and they ruled with an iron fist, relatively iron fist. But I wanted to defeat BN regime. That's 2013. And then they won. The N1, the ruling coalition won. They retained their majority, or a small majority, and I worked in government. I actually worked in government after that, and I realized how difficult things were. And then 2018, I was just angry. I wanted to throw a brick at the window of the establishment. Not so much to change the government, not so much for institutional reforms, but just to show how angry I am. Let's go vote. And I think that's what happened in the 2018 election. People were just angry. The best turnout is by people who are just angry. And I think this is true, right? So when you're pissed, you go to the polls, no matter how difficult it is. That's why people from UK, from Denmark, from Australia, they made sure that their ballot was back on time. They were angry. I don't see the anger now, for many reasons. We can talk about this. But as I grew older, I realized that I am not as optimistic as I should be. But I'm not worried anymore. I remember my mentor told me, before you turn 30, you want to save the world. After you turn 30, you just want to save yourself. And this is a very pessimistic, cynical view. But it's not necessarily wrong. And when I say you want to save yourself, what does it mean? If you look at what's happening in the US, there's a reason why the Democrats are suffering. Because they talk about democracy is on the ballot. Remember, I don't know if you guys know the US midterm elections now. Democracy is on the ballot, right? We have to save democracy from the MAGA, Trumpist people, the election deniers. Does this resonate with the people? No. Why? Inflation is skyrocketing in the US. The gas, we've got a few, I think for the gas, but the gas prices are skyrocketing. Inflation is very high. But the Democrats don't seem their message doesn't resonate with their electorate because they don't talk about bread and butter issues. What does it mean, bread and butter issues? In this part of the world, we call it bread nasi, which is rice bowl issues. Because we're Asian, we eat rice, not bread and butter. And this is why I think parties like Barisan Nasional, they have an edge. They have an edge because the messaging is very simple. Prosperity, stability, progress. It's boring, right? For us, we live in urban areas, we want to see institutional reforms. But the messaging, like it or not, the people that have the heavier weightage in vote are not in the urban areas, they're in the rural areas. And Barisan Nasional are very, very good. Their messaging is always bread and butter or rice bowl issues. And I noticed this because I run a couple of NGOs, a number of NGOs actually. And initially when I started one of these NGOs, I wanted to do civic engagement. And civic engagement basically means the process of everyday people like us making the democracy better. It's not what we do during elections, it's what we do between elections. It's not about the vote, it's about participatory democracy. It's Habama's idea of organizing, agitating the policymakers, making sure that they hear our voice. That was the idea. This NGO was called Nation Building School. Cool name, yeah? And we wanted to do a lot of things, right? We want to make people civic warriors, right? Go out there, you don't have to be a politician, just be a change maker. It was great. I have to admit it was great, but I noticed one thing. When I spoke to the everyday people, especially Malays, the ethnic majority Malays, I noticed one thing. They were not interested, not because they didn't care about reforms, not because they didn't care about diversity, but because they were worried about the future. Worried about JOBS, jobs. It is the economy stupid, right? This is the election campaign from, I think, Clinton in 1992. And that was very, very, very present when I speak to the Malays. Mostly Malays. They're like, look, I like democracy, but I have my job, right? So this is the issue. Then I realized that after doing this for about a good 7 years, right? Eventually I pivoted. And one of the things I do now is is capacity building for young people to get jobs, to be more employable. And when I do events, I start forums like this, I have to get maybe 50 people to come on democracy. When I do job events, I can get up to 1,000 people. And that says something. It's not that people are not interested in democracy, they are. But they are more interested in their own livelihoods. And this is why I think the main opposition, which is Pakatan Harapan, Pack of Hope, they are always talking about institutional reforms, right? Needs-based economy. We need to change the country. No more, less race-based politics, not really, less race-based politics. But look at Barisan Nasional. It's very simple. Undi kita jaga kamu. Right? Workforce will take care of you. Pekerjaan, cost of hidup. Clear messaging, right? Cost of living. Employment opportunities. It's clear. It may not resonate with you, but it resonates with the people outside, especially in kampung. And I think this is why I think they understand because of their grassroots machinery. They are able to feedback. They are able to feedback from this majority of the Malays back to their party and their manifesto. And one of the persons I engaged was Nazir Razak. Nazir Razak is a Shibna, as you all know, Nazir Razak, the former banker. And he has this thing called Banker Malaysia you know, BMA. And I read his book, great book, you should read it if you have a chance. And he has this thing called BMA where he wants to do citizens assembly to talk about issues beyond the short-term electoral cycle, whereby you get a bunch of people like here, random, different races and all that, sit together and talk about race-based issues and stuff like that. And I said this is great, and I said to him, this is great, but you're not going to get traction. Why? Why? Why would you do this on my idea, right? And I said to him, because you haven't linked the institutional reforms and long-term changes to what people care. You haven't done that. And secondly, why is it in English? Why is it in English? If you want to reach to the everyday Malaysians, you do not speak English, you speak exactly. Well, it depends, right? The different constituencies as well, Chinese, Indian, and Pakistan. But most of the time you speak Malay. And then the word BMA, Better Malaysia Assembly, what is it in Malay? At the time it wasn't like Liburan untuk Malaysia yang terbaik. It is such a horrible name, right? And I said to him, let's be real. If we can tie reforms to jobs and cost of living, people will support you because you take care of them first. Not bribery. We're not bribing the electorate. This is what the electorate wants. This is number one on the list. Look at the Merdeka Center poll yesterday. 70% of people, what is their biggest concern right now? What is the biggest concern? Economy. It's not institutional reforms. Not to say that's not important. It is very important. Yeah? People actually care about corruption. Beyond the polls, if you look at social media, which you should do, and look at Twitter, it's very interesting. When you see Western national politicians talk about their manifesto, you can see the Malay comments. And to me, this is a turning point. In the past, you will see non-Malays say, "Alah, kau cakap pasal good governance, kau corrupt." But now you look at the Malays, they are now attacking popular politicians. And this for me is a turning point. Because to show that the young Malays, especially the young Malays, they care about corruption, they care about leakages, they care about bribery, right? Now, but I was trying to talk back. I was too excited to talk about the young Malays. Okay, the young Malays, they care about this. What's important now is you have to link the two. This is what Pakatan Harapan, I think, doesn't do very well. They tried to do it through the manifesto, which they call action plan. Ironically enough, because I think what happened in the last G, they are traumatized. But in the action plan, they mentioned about cost of living. But we know one thing that the problem is the messaging is not very clear. The messaging is very, very poor. They still talk about reforms, they still talk about business policy at the expense of jobs. And I think this is very important. I want to end here to say that if politicians, and we should pressure them, we should progress and pressure them, if we really want to change this country, take care of the majority first. The majority people, they want what they want. You can't change what they want. If they want you to take care of them in terms of jobs, give them first. And once you do that, you can talk about phase 2 or reforms. But do not start this conversation by saying, look at you. You don't like democracy. You don't like reforms. You know, what is your problem? You're so selfish. Do not do that. And this is what actually we do. And the other thing is, like orang kampung, right? Let's make fun of orang kampung bodoh. Senang kena tipu dengan BN. Kasih RM5 dia undi. This is the reason why we will never be able to change the country. When we have such a condescending view of orang kampung, the rural folks, this is why the country will never progress. Because orang kampung not stupid. Orang kampung not stupid at all. They know they have priorities. But when we don't acknowledge that, this is why we fail. And this is why I think it's important for us to go back and talk to the everyday persons and read stuff you don't want to read. Read to some Malaysia. Look at TV Girl. You must do this. Talk to everyone, not just people in Semenanjung, talk to people in Sabah Sarawak. And you have a much richer and nuanced understanding of the country. And I'll give it back to you.
I thought that the Ceramas will start outside, but today. But thank you, very energetic message. I'll just ask him one question to elaborate further on your point, and then we'll open up to the floor for questions. You put a lot of emphasis on rice bowl issues, right? But maybe a quick comment from you on identity politics, where you talk about rice bowl issues, but the question is the rice halal? Is the bowl halal?
Yeah, I mean, rice is always halal. Don't imagine food pork with rice. Well, you can. It's like nothing to read, right? You change the name. So, okay, right? Look at data as well. And look at data. There will always be voters who will vote on racial lines. There will always be, not in Malaysia, in Singapore, in US, I know it's shocking, like Singapore. In everywhere in the world, there will always be folks that will vote on racial lines. There will always be these folks, but they are never in the majority. They are never in the majority. I think Rafizi, I think he tried to talk on this, touch on this topic. I think he talked about 20% or 30% of folks that will always vote on racial lines. Not just the Malays, other races as well. So no matter what happens, right? In the manifesto, it doesn't matter what in the manifesto, I will die vote for my race, for my religion. Malaysia has another problem with religion. So usually folks in the East Coast, they vote for religion more than the folks over this side of the coast. So they're not in minority, and this is important. They are always in the minority. And this is why I think the issue of rice bowl issues will always take center place. Because when parties go into election, when they campaign on rice bowl issues, they are more likely to get those votes. They are fence sitters, because fence sitters are majority of the electorate. Some say they are like 50%, some say they're 80%, but I think they're probably 50%. So maybe 50% made up their mind. So come 19 November, I think most of you made up your mind, right? Most of you probably know who you're going to vote for. But maybe, right? Some of you are not too sure. Now there's so many offerings. You got PN, PH, PN, GTA, and I don't know, so many, right? GTA is not the game, yeah? It's but most, so folks here, they are more attuned to politics, already made up their mind. But folks, or 50%, and this is the interesting part, the 50% of the electorate, they are fence-sitters. They're not people that come to these events. They know. Do you notice this? People that go to Ceramah, actually not people that are fence-sitters. People that go to Ceramah are people who are already supporters or not members, right? Maybe if you notice this, if you've been to Ceramah, if you see at the front, there's a lot of supporters. But the further you are on the stage, the weaker your application is. And notice this, right? There are some Ceramah I've been to, and notice this, there's a speaker at the stage right here, and there are folks that refuse to sit in the seats. They always sit inside. Those are fence-sitters. Those are fence-sitters. And those are folks that are like, no. I said, no, I said, enough. There's are people that just want to hear about this party, about this party. They may have Googled a bit about this party. They may have seen on social media, and they're making up their minds. And more often than not, these fence-sitters, on top of their mind is always the economy. And don't forget this, the government will tell you this. I'm part of this thing for Malaysia Jobs Coalition. You see how big our job, massive our jobs. The government will tell you this. Unemployment is at 3%. The lowest it has been since the pandemic. Now we're looking at about 500, 600,000 people that are unemployed. Okay, but what they don't tell you is this: 2.4 million are underemployed. 2.4 million are underemployed. If you add the 600,000, 3 million people are either unemployed or underemployed. Now there's a story that you may have caught recently. KFC, this lady, she's a graduate of a university, chemistry, Bachelor of Chemistry honors, and she works in KFC. Have you seen this? She works in KFC. And this is the problem of this is the problem of the economy right now. The fighting young people. 70% of the economy are either low skilled or semi-skilled. Only 50% are high skilled, and 30% are more likely high-paying jobs. So when you have 70% that are semi-skilled or low skilled, people are not getting paid enough. And that's why government introduced direct cash transfer like RAID, ESH, that's what we call it now, Bantuan Prihatin now, Bantuan Progression, I think, Bantuan Progression, yeah, and people will say, oh, this is corruption, we're bribing the electorate with this direct cash transfer. No, we are not. These people need the money because they are underpaid, because they are underemployed, or they have low skill jobs. So be careful when we talk about this. This is because it's extremely important. When you look out there and people, just because they don't vote for PH or they don't vote for social reforms, doesn't mean they're stupid. It means their priority is something else. So just be nuanced about this.
Okay, I think we've heard from our three panelists. I would like to open the floor for questions. Just raise your hand and one of the committee members would pass the microphone to you. Any questions? Right, there's one here. And anyone else? Just one moment. Anyone else? Okay, another one there. All right, you go first. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Assalamualaikum. My name is Khalid. I'm an advocate for the Chevening this year. I actually have a few questions for three of you guys, but I'll just ask one in the sake of to let other people ask as well. So my question comes from Dr. Edmund Gomez just now from his talk, and he was talking about UBA. He used that as an example. I just want to get you guys' thoughts about that. So UBA, she's running in Puchong, and she's running against Datuk Neo, Jimmy Chow, something? Yeah. No, not Jimmy Chu, not Jimmy Chu. Yeah, not Chu guy. And Uncle Kentang, as some of you might know, is also running for some reason in Puchong. But to Miss Arina's comment, you said that this was a race to the bottom, or the lesser of two evils like that. And we just found out that UBA, she has ties to IY Group. And so, like as a voter, if I was voting Puchong, who should I vote for? Should do we vote for the lesser of two evils? Do we vote for, or do we not vote at all? And I think this is where apathy comes from as well. Like when you have to choose between two evils or three evils or four evils now, who do you vote for? What do you think? Thank you.
Yeah. Test. Yeah, no, I honestly think that's really tough. But don't think I can tell you who to vote for exactly. But I think some criteria is, right? So I think one, you need to do your research. So now, like you said, okay, you found this new information, the linkages with IOI. I think you have to question yourself, how much does this value to me? How important is it to me? So I think you need to do your research, understand what are your priorities, and then after that, then you can, I think, rank them, right? Then you can rank them, okay, this person fulfills my criteria on X, Y, Z. And then that's when you can narrow it down. Ultimately, although I do believe that not voting is also, a choice, and is also a right for you as well. And that's something that you can exercise, of course. But in this instance, that's why I say you have to look at the bigger picture. That's where you also look at not only just your lead, look at the party that she goes for, and the same goes with all the other candidates, right? And that's why you look at, okay, what's the likelihood of this organization forwarding my cause? Because as you know how government works, you're not whatever MP you're electing, you're also electing the PM candidate as well. So it's not just looking down at that level, you're looking at it at a much higher level. So looking at what the PM stands for as well is also really important, and how much does that factor into your consideration, and what the party's agendas, will factor into your consideration as well. So don't just look at, yeah, that's just one candidate, because sometimes the candidate might be really good. It's just that within the party, they don't really have much of a voice, for example. Right? So, I mean, a lot of people I know like to say KJ is the progressive Retanglo, things like that. So I think that's how maybe one way that you can think about it.
Morning, everyone. I'm Prashantini. I think I want to tie my question to what Prof. Gomez spoke about this morning. I'm also one of those, just apathy, because I've realized for a while that it's so mind-boggling and troubling as well to see the corruption that's entrenched in our Malaysian political DNA. But besides a vote, which is perhaps too soon for a lot of Malaysians to make a change, how can a layperson like me and a lot of us, what can we do to change the corruption issue that we are facing in this country, so that not more and more younger generation will really not care about politics now, because we feel like we can't really change even with one vote, right? Going to election on the 19th of November for me is just to cast my undi lah, it's a duty, but I don't feel like I can change enough. So how can lay people like us change, or what can we do? Yeah. Thank you.
Which panelist do you want to hear from?
Anyone, actually.
Maybe Prof.
Either one.
Well, let me extend the question a bit wider. How many of you think that politics is dirty? Okay. How many of you think that, keep your hand. Okay, how many of you think that politics is dangerous? Okay. How many of you think that politics is difficult? Okay, all those of you who have raised 3 times, now raise your hand. You know what does it mean? Politics to use is a 3D job. Subconsciously, you want to outsource it to some non-Malaysians because you want to put it out of your mind, and you expect the country will be better. Right? So come back to that point. I think we really need to deal with problems in many ways. I agree with you about that. We shouldn't put down on people who are driven by much more primary concerns of livelihood. And don't fool yourself to think that these are kampung folks. You go to Shah Alam, half of Shah Alam is working class. We have 80% of the population in urban area. There's not so many urban rural folk out there for you to point a finger to. People don't vote because they feel it's not aligned to their interests. So go back to the question, how can you change all this? If you don't vote at all, no one sees you. You're just invisible. But merely by voting, you are just one of millions. No one sees you either, right? Okay, you appear in my numbers, but people won't remember you. But this is where you can make a difference. Okay, think about this. Prof. Terrence, myself, people that you can call out the name in the media, and we say we want to advocate for something. Let's say 4 of us have been calling for the Attorney General chambers. to be split up, so you have an independent public prosecution office, right? You think the politicians really be so surprised that, oh yes, Prof Gomez, this is the formula they were looking for? No, they would just dismiss us. We got dismissed all the time. Why? It's actually your answer. You see, very few people like you care about institutional reform. Most people care about the rice bowl. What's the difference you're going to make? No one, people out there, if you're going to reach out to any candidate and say, I want your answer on this, they will look at you and try to categorize you, put you in some pigeonhole to get an explanation, right? This is probably, okay, maybe because she's Chevening. But when people cannot find any reason, when too many people go out and talk about this, you are still a minority, but you can create a false impression that the country has changed. And that's what moves the politicians. It's just psychology. Now, I have to repeat this so many times. I don't believe politics is 3D. And I'm further to go, I'll go further to say this. I believe politicians can be your best friend in that very idiomatic sense. You know what I mean? You know, certain creatures are man's best friend and so on, right? Okay, but that require house training. You need to give politicians that training. And if you don't go out, your best friend don't even see you. But if you just go out and vote and you keep quiet, they still can't hear you. So we need you to be out there. And what is very important, the point that I really support what you say, is that we need to link it back of what we want immediately to the deeper level, the deep causes. If you think that we can solve the issue about jobs and livelihood by giving cash hand out, we are going down further, right? But you don't address that. You cannot be empathetic to that. You no way you can no way take the country forward. So we need more people to be able to link all this issue together, and do not let the 3D thing sink in. Unless you really can find smart foreigners who can take over the country and run it for us.
Yes, go ahead.
There was a framework. So let me just give context. I joined this thing called Pusat Rakyat Group, which is the formal name is Malaysian Center for Constitutionalism and Human Rights. They're pretty good. I remember this guy. I think founded by this guy called he's a former lawyer. I think he's a Chevening. Yeah. Not also Chevening. She was so great. So anyways, I went to this. It's basically a school of social change, and I remember this is a long time ago, but I remember the framework. There was this guy. I can't remember his name. I could get it wrong, but like David Moyer, something like that. Guy I think from Harvard many years ago, maybe like 1960s. He says this, right? Don't worry about, okay, you talk about role. What role can I play? You can play many roles. Now I'll give you 4. The first role is citizen. Everyday people, right? Not high, right? Everyday people. Vote. Social media, right? Post, share, right? Simple. Don't worry about it, right? If you think that that's all you can do, that's all you can do. Don't worry about it. If that's all you can do, that's all you need to do, right? Then there is the role of a rebel. I love this. Rebels are very few, but rebels are the guys that go to protest, demonstration, right? F the government, F the system, right? Rebels are not many. So example is Adam Ali. Adam Ali is a prominent rebel last time. Now he's in PKR. But rebels are people that go to protest, they demonstrate, they not necessarily rebellious. Some people just go protest, peaceful protest, but rebels are like the rebellious streak, rebellious nature. So they are rebels. They are reformers. Reformers are very different than rebels. Reformers are people that I think maybe maybe a reformer. You work within the system to change it. As you see, for example, you work within the system to change it. So you work within that system. You speak the language. You drink the very sweet teh tarik to talk to the policymaker, right? You do this work that not many people can do or should do, right? Very few people are reformers. Usually they need to have a nuanced understanding of the system, the legal system, human rights, and all that. Okay, so that's what reformers, right? Usually they are lawyers, bureaucrats, ex-bureaucrats, human rights activists. Very few, fewer than rebels. Right? And the fourth is social change agents. So this can be people like myself, right? We run NGOs or CSOs, civil society organizations. We organize communities, we do forums. Like this can be also a social change agents. And this is a role that you can play a more active role. Okay, so this framework will really help. So imagine that you four, right? Citizen, rebel, reformer, and social change agent. So don't worry too much. If you feel that many ways is bucket based on the capacity, of course, everyone has lives. So if you feel that you can do a little bit more, maybe you can think about, based on your expertise and skills, of course, what are the four buckets. But if you feel that all you can do is maybe just vote, that's it. Be a citizen, and do your thing. So this is why this is an excellent framework. The weakness of this framework is just the four. I've been told, there's more to that. I know. But four is basically an easy way to understand this. But don't stress too much. Don't worry, guys. Change can happen in many ways, right? So think of it in those four ways, and inshallah, we can change the country.
We have, I think, 10 more minutes to go. So that should have 2 more questions, and then we'll close. At the back.
Hi, good morning. I'm Navinash, second year law student at ATC. I like the point regarding the corruption that Prof stated earlier. Since a young age, in teen, I guess even I myself was a little disgusted with the corruption that was going on in the government level. But then I believe that instead of complaining, nothing was going to change. It is if we participated in it. So I built a liking to participate in politics. So at a later age of 18 and 19, I started to get involved in NGO works as maybe a starter pathway into politics. But then when I got more involved into NGOs, a place that was supposed to be promising to at least change politics, it was the same thing then. What's supposed to be a platform to be fighting against corruption, against any type of wrongdoings, they themselves within that are practicing that. From bribery to even intimidation, bullying, it happens there. Cash is king is there also. Whoever even joins in politics, those who are idealists, optimists, once they are in that power, regardless MP or other, those who join as idealists, they see that the system is so corrupted, just to retain power, they too have to be corrupted. So those who are supposed to fight for these reforms, they themselves become corrupted. So my question today is, at what point does it really matter? I'm not saying in a pessimistic way, it's more of a, if all of us join politics or NGOs just to reform, but only to get a top position, that we realize that to stay there is to be corrupted, and we just lost sight. Is there an end to this, or could we actually overcome this? Thank you.
Which panelists would you like to hear
Would you
from?
want to take the second question as well? So it's the last
Yeah,
one.
sure. But who do you want to hear from?
Actually, I would prefer all three, but maybe Dr. Wong can also.
All right. Second question.
Hello, good morning, Assalamualaikum. My name is Saudi Ali. I was a Chevening scholar from last year, so I just returned in September. I did my master's in sociology at LSE. As a way of introduction, I'm also a member of Apathy Socialist Malaysia. So I just have a question, because we are realizing that regardless of the specific political party or coalition, we realize that the triumph of this election has been secured by right-wing parties that are nationalistic, that are ethnocentric. They are to varying degrees very strong in their grassroots hold, and they have a strong alliance with corporate capital, regardless of Bumi-Putra capital or non-Bumi-Putra capital. So we realize that they are going to win this election, regardless of a specific coalition that will eventually win power at the end of the day. So realizing this scenario, and this is just extending Professor Gomez's analysis of the situation, Party Socialist Malaysia is advancing a very, I guess, a rice bowl analysis of the situation. In the sense that we wanted to focus on the material well-being of ordinary people, working class people, farmers across the country. But yet we are seeing that the message is not fully resonant with people in general. We are a small party. We have our problems with regards to resource mobilization. So the extent and the reach of our message is limited. So in that sense, I'm heartened to hear ideas about political financing and public funding of political parties that surely in the future, sometime in the future, I don't know when, that will help smaller parties like Parti Sosialis Malaysia, Parti Rakyat Malaysia, and other smaller parties to have some say in election, whether or not national, state, or local election. So I'm asking opinion from all the panelists that we have here. So in the medium term, what should the members of the public, in terms of wanting a real alternative to a political arrangement that can get out of a political economic structure that supports corruption, that supports certain regressive, nationalistic, elite-led politics? What should the members of the public look for in our political parties, seeing that an alternative, a clear alternative like Parti Sosialis is not there yet visible at the national level? I guess that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. I think these two questions should be enough. Maybe we'll start with Prof.
Thanks. I want to start with this quotation. I never dare to be radical when young, for fear it would make me conservative when old. Robert Frost. It's easy to start with just passion and thinking that you can change the world entirely. But if you can analyze the world a little bit better, then you can look at what are feasible to be changed and what probably may not. For example, you think about politics. What is politics? Ultimately, it's the ability to agitate, to articulate a need, a set of preferences, and to reach compromises. Now, these two are very different things, right? But that's what politicians do. If you cannot agitate, you cannot get anything changed. But if you agitate and not prepared to make any compromise, you probably tear the country apart. So whether it is NGO or political parties, they are bad practices need to be eliminated, phrased out. But there are also some of the things that would remain bad. For example, horse trading. And horse tradings are necessary. Because otherwise, if everyone insists to be very principled, you get nothing done. The society will be torn apart. So it's a question on how do we embark on conversations on what needs to be changed. And one important thing is to dry away from looking for solutions in moralistic lens. Try to look for some saints and sages, angels, among either politicians or activists. You're bound to be disappointed, right? And also don't hope for, say, well, maybe because we don't have anyone new, let's hope for the next generation. Even you're going home and make baby tonight, that will take 18 years before that baby can actually be eligible to join politics, right? It's much more practical. Instead of looking for the right person, how do we make the environment profitable, politically profitable, for people to do, even for the wrong people to do the right things to survive? That requires a lot of changes. In national politics, we have to move away and say whether this is the best prime ministerial candidate or that guy, but go back and say, how will our parliamentary institution function? How do we get a better bunch of parliamentarians to sit in committees to check on the ministry and to be the pool of future minister? We need all those solutions. And so don't be despair too early. Unless you're not going to live so long, then of course it's fine. Now back to the questions of PSM. I think what PSM really need to push are two things. PSM need to tie institutional reform. So I'm going the opposite from my friend here, into class struggle. Because PSM like to criticize capitalism and so on, but while they are supportive of some institutions, it's never their core because they're actually more like NGO. You need to tie it down on two things. If you want to survive and overcome all these capitalist constraint on you, you need a mixed member system with party lists, so that small party gets some seats in the parliament in the Dun based on your vote share. Second, you need local elections. Why? With a smaller constituency, it's much easier for you to reach the threshold to grab the seat. You need all those things. And this will be the very opposite of many of the advocates. I'm probably guilty as well. That when we talk about institutional reform, we are speaking it from a perspective of procedural democracy. So we need people who actually talk about this is a capitalist conspiracy, that why socialist idea never get to the parliament. Give that passion into it. And then what we need, of course, to push for money and so on. Now, this is where the track is. We can actually get public fundings much earlier. You don't count on Putrajaya. Press it on the door of PH, on PM. These are Prof. Gomez know that these are their MPs are sitting in the all parties parliamentary group on political finance reform. They support this. When we say for the government to fork out 120 million a year to be distributed to all parties, nothing can happen. But the state can also, states like Selangor can fork out maybe just 10 million, 5 million, doesn't matter. The point is we have to start somewhere. People get the right idea that we pay political parties to be clean so that they do not depend on private funders or their own pocket. To not do so is to be penny wise and pound foolish. We need to get all this idea out in a language that most people can resonate with. Not pointing finger at just scolding people, which it makes us feel good, I know, right? But it doesn't help. A few people, unless you have that charisma, you can scold people until they cry and repent and say, "I follow you." Fine. But if you don't have that, then find a more pragmatic way of getting your message through. I think the country is full of hope. I remember what I want to say just now. You know what's best about Malaysia? Is that we have so many unexpected or unintended consequences. People don't know what happened. Think of it. Any of us here knew that the political tsunami would have taken place? No. People did not have the intention to bring down Barisan National Government, not even denying clearly wanting the two-third, denying the two-third, but they were out to punish the government because it was so strong. How can the government be collapsed? Right? There's so many things have changed. Even the Sheraton move, I know it hurts a lot of you. I want to put up this heretic point. Sheraton move was a blessing in disguise for Malaysia. Why? Had PH been in government at that time, do you think that it is much more competent? Definitely. But do you think it would be possible to do take out the measures to come back, to introduce vaccinations and so on, to close down mosques when factories are allowed to be open? PAS was the first one to jump on it. But because PAS was in government, PAS had to defend all this, right? It destroyed the myth of Malay unity. Now you know the three Malay parties cannot be united because they were like three brothers going after the same girl. How can they love each other? Right? And never had Malaysian, especially the Malay, been more appreciative of rule of law because we hate dual darjah. The phenomena of double standard in law enforcement, all these are positive things. None of this is planned. We now have a hung parliament, likely to have next one, and it's the hung parliament that deliver reforms like anti-hopping law instead of a reformist government in PH. So don't give up hope. If you're going to live for another day, keep your hope because it's cheap, it comes free, right? All you need to do is just to believe that There are endless possibilities out there. I think that was a BN slogan in 2018 or 2013. Huh? 2013, right? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Dear Zhang.
You have to say much, that was really, really good. I think on your point, your question, it is very valid, and I hear you. If I can just be a grandpa, it's because you're young. When you're young, you want change now, right? Change must happen now, now, dismantle this now, right? And it's fine, right? I mean, if you're not like that, I'll be worried, right? But I think change takes time. And there's two forms of change. Usually, there's only two forms, right? Revolution or evolution. Unfortunately, Malaysia didn't opt for revolution. We don't believe in the idea of dismantling the system immediately.
We're too lazy.
True, we're scared. Actually, we're scared, right?
Lazy.
We're scared. We're scared. Right? Ask your mom. Oh, no. Tak boleh. It's like that, right? It's fine. It's fine. This is who we are. Change takes time. And if you look at the past 10 years, change has happened, right? If you look at BN being defeated, it was a massive change. You look at Percy rallies, making election cleaner and fairer now. They are cleaner and fairer now. You don't hear so much about. I mean, they are, what do you call it? That was you change the gerrymandering. Yes,
They didn't change.
they didn't change, but many things have changed. Election practices have become a lot cleaner. Even corruption. MPs declaring their asset. It was not a thing you can think of last time. Now, criticizing DN openly, attacking openly. You tried doing that 10 years ago. I did, and I was called by the special branch of the police for questioning. Not because I was criticizing, but because I hosted site survey. I was an organizer of an event that invited an opposition figure, and I was called for questioning by a special branch. When I did the president rally in 2012 in university, I was called by this is a very long story, I don't know if I can share this, but the bureaucrat threatened my safety, threatened my family's safety 10 years ago. You think this will happen now? Of course not. So much has happened actually. Change has happened. It's just that it's slow, it's gradual. You don't see it, but it is happening. You ask the older guys, they will tell you. Tell my dad, oh man, never thought the end would be that, right? It happens. So when you're big, I mean I'm 32, right? Not that old, but I've seen like things that happened in the past 12 years, right? And things will happen during when you went to you will see things happening. Achebe, which is this, I don't know where he's from, he's a prominent scholar, Achebe. He talked about three things, right? Leaders, system, and people. When a country is in peril, who do you blame? People, leaders, system. And he actually argued, rightfully, people should never be at fault because people don't have the decision-making power. You should never think of the system alone, or the people leaders alone. You need both leaders and system. Systems and leaders are important for change to happen in the country. This is why I think I'm very troubled when people say, oh, we just need to put people in power. We put Alumni in power. No. You need to also reform the system, and you need both. And this is something that I find it is lacking in our discourse. The fact that, oh, let's put people in the government and they will change it. Look at Apathy, they were not able to do it very effectively. We need to change the system. The other question was interesting about BSM. I think I take a different stance. The reason why BSM is not successful is because of the S. Socialism, party socialist. There is a taboo ever since the communist insurgency in the 50s. The government has clamped down, on all left-wing parties, and you can see the only surviving party is Party Rakyat Malaysia, which has struggled for the past 60 years, right? Since they survived the insurgency, the banning. But BSM sort of breaking away from the other. The left-wing parties have a more difficult time in the country, especially when they try to put class discourse forward. Because what you find is you come in clash with this 3R, right? The race, morality, and religion discourse. And actually it's very interesting. I think a lot of Malays now are becoming more class conscious, and I think that's great. But the problem is the 3R ideology is still very, very strong. Or IMR, Islam ideology. It's very, very strong. I think it's only a matter of time. I think Malays are realizing that, you know what? Those guys on top are super rich and great and I'm poor, right? The time will come. And I honestly think BSM is not the party to do it because of the S in the name. if PSM was not socialist, it was something else, I think it can make a real difference. If it was something, another party, like party, Tukar Negara or whatever, right? Can. Yes, boleh, right? Parti Tukar Negara boleh. PSM tak boleh. The name is doomed. Because the Malays still find socialism taboo. Anti-Islam, bahaya ni, kalau masuk PSM tak jadi Islam. Right? It's there. You can't change it. No matter how hard you just can't change it. There will be alternatives. Muda is alternative, like it or not, male, like or kid Muda. There are alternatives. They are making headways. And they have done it faster than PSM. PSM has been around for 20 years. Muda has been around for 2 years, and they are protesting in 5-7 seats. So alternative is there. PSM may not be the vehicle that can deliver the alternative. Or if I'm being honest, I love PSM anyway. I love PSM was a job guarantee. I'm a very lucky guy. I like the idea, but I think PSM is not the vehicle to deliver that change. But not saying that you should not leave PSM, stay in PSM, maybe you can change it, right? But we need to have more alternatives. The more parties that there are in the country, the better it is for democracy.
Yeah, so I think I won't repeat some of the stuff that's been said. Maybe just one thing to add to the point that was earlier asked, and also a combination of your question, is that number one, I think you underestimate how your voice is being heard. So this is also based on my experience. Government is actually tracking what you're saying. So I mean that's how he got called up, right? So basically, yeah, no, they do. So they always do sentiment analysis, or they hire companies to do sentiment analysis. They have Stratcom, strategic communications meetings every week or every month, and they're actually tracking what people are saying. So then, obviously, whether or not what they want to do about it is a different story, but they are listening. So, and it comes to a point where you say enough in volume, and it can even just be as small as in your conversations with your friends at the mama or the coffee shop. And then when people start talking about it, the government is listening and they have to react. If you notice with the Malaysian government, regardless if it's BN or PH, they are very reactive government. They can put in a policy, people flip, and then they'll be like, oh, actually, yeah, it's not that great. So it does matter. You may not see that it does matter, but they are tracking and they are monitoring. So all these reports, Merdeka Center, all this, and these are just the big names, actually smaller companies that actually do the sentiment analysis. And then this goes the same within your organization as well. And it happens at an organizational level. You need to speak up and it needs to be tracked. And then over time, of course, whether or not it changes is a separate story, but you are creating that momentum and that pathway for change. And I think that's important. So I think that's just one thing I would like to add on that point. On the second point about PSM, so I think two things. One, unfortunately, the reality in Malaysia is also what Zaid said. Race, religion, and culture are all very much intertwined in how we also see corruption. That's why you see a lot of Malays also be like, tak apa, dia ambil duit, dia asalkan orang kita, right? So that's very, very strong, and it's also within religion as well, right? So it even comes to that. So that's why in the idea of capitalism and socialism, these are very complex ideas that people don't really grasp. They don't really see as capitalism as your understanding of capitalism. Their idea of capitalism is just making money, and to them maybe that's okay, right? But they don't understand the nuances within these discussions. So I think what needs to happen then is you probably need to broaden your demographic in terms of who participates within PSM. So engage within these people in these groups like the Malay communities who probably will align to what you are talking about. So I think this is what Mahathir was trying to do. I mean, there's method to his madness, I guess, with GTA, because he split the Malay votes. And that's where, it made the Malays realize that we're actually not fighting for the same thing. And it made them realize that what their wants are a lot more nuanced rather than just me fighting for my rights as based on my race. It's a lot more than that. So I think if you're able to capture that, because let's also be honest, PSM also has a branding issue in the sense that it could be seen as biased towards a particular race or demographic because of its history, not because of anything else, right? Because of how it started. So I think that could be an issue. And this goes with the same issue with other parties, right? The AP also has a branding issue despite them also trying to show that they are multiracial. So I think that's and this is an opportune time, I would think, for you to go in and try to broaden that demographic. So there was an interesting study that ICS Yusof Ishaq did, and then it showed that out of all the political parties, the end households had the highest amount of rebels, where they detracted away from their family. And the more conservative youth, or the youth groups within those households moved to PN, and the rest moved to PH and Muda. Like, so I think that's where you can capitalize on these things, because now there's also an ideological shift within households, questioning whether or not I should follow what my family says, or what my household has been doing. So I think that could be an interesting angle that ASM could take. So I think it's just tweaking that messaging. Thanks. I think that's all for me.
Can we have a round of applause?